The house that turns reflections into prisoners. It was an ordinary night, the kind where nothing seems to escape the routine, yet it hid something that would forever change the perception of anyone who dared to look closer. There are places, people, and events that hold secrets so deep that time, no matter how far it marches, cannot erase them. You are about to enter a narrative where every detail matters, where answers always seem within reach, but disappear in the next instant. Nothing here is simple, nothing is obvious, and every shadow holds an echo of something no one has ever been able to fully explain. What you're about to hear isn't just a story, it's an invitation to traverse a labyrinth of uncertainty, where the line between the real and the inexplicable blurs into silence. The further you go, the clearer it becomes that there are forces at work in the invisible margins of everyday life, as if a hidden presence were shaping every step, every look, every word. Prepare yourself. The truth, if it exists, will never be delivered directly. It hides in the silences, the absences, and the contradictions that remain suspended in the air. Now that you've accepted this invitation, all that's left to do is move forward. But don't expect immediate clarity, because each answer raises new questions. Each clue opens an even deeper corridor of mystery. It's in this shadowy space, between what can be seen and what is hidden, that the journey begins. The package arrived, without a return address, wrapped in crumpled brown paper, as if it had passed through many hands in a hurry and fear. Inside was a faded photo of an isolated house, a map with the route marked in red pen, a brass key with jagged teeth, and a portable recorder with a single 13-minute file. When I pressed play, there was almost nothing but background noise. 3 dry, rhythmic knocks, and a whisper so low it seemed to come from inside my ear. "Come back before it gets dark." I pretended not to hear, but as dusk fell, I hit the road. The house in the photo existed, with the same crooked tiles and the same dirt yard, as if waiting for me. The key turned just a click. The door opened a hand's breadth, exhaling the cold air of a place too closed for too long. In the hallway, a stopped clock read 3:17 a.m. Old paintings with scratched-out faces. Only a child's eyes had been spared. Helena appeared carved repeatedly into the wood. On the ground, enough dust to reveal footprints. 2 identical sequences, mine and another face-to-face. The silence was so dense it felt alive, as if the house breathed in irregular pauses. Outside, the wind blew, but no windows rattled, no doors creaked. Then the tape recorder in my hand, which I swore I'd turned off, started playing again on its own. The tape advanced, repeating the same dry beats. 3 rings, spaced by short intervals, always identical. But then, a new voice overtook the noise, hoarse, muffled, as if coming from a distant room. "You shouldn't have come in." The narrow hallway seemed to lengthen with each step, and the scratched pictures seemed to follow with invisible gazes. I hesitated to return, but the front door was now closed, locked from the inside without the key I'd previously carried. On the floor, the footprints that weren't mine had disappeared, leaving only a trail of dragged dust, as if something had been pulled to the back of the house. I walked down the hallway, my breath held, each step echoing, as if the house amplified my movements. At the back, a wooden door, darker than the others, stood out. The lock had no key, just a jagged hole, as if someone had brutally ripped the metal out. When I placed my hand against it, I felt the surface cold, almost wet, as if the wood were weeping. I pushed slowly, and the creak broke the silence like a muffled scream. The room revealed was small, windowless, lit only by the dim light coming from the hallway. In the center, a chair faced the wall. On it rested another older tape recorder, its dusty tape already in place. As I pressed the button, a child's voice filled the space. "Helena is still here." She never left. The recording ended with a short metallic laugh, so dissonant it seemed not to have originated in a human throat. On the wall opposite the chair, deep scratches formed the word "stay." The air grew heavy, as if the small room had been drained of oxygen. The silence after the recording was suffocating, and even standing still, I could feel the floor vibrate slightly, as if something was pulsing beneath the boards. I leaned in to take a closer look at the scratches on the wall and realized they weren't just fingernail marks. There were traces of dried blood in the grooves, staining the letters a dark, ancient red. The hallway lamp flickered, casting jagged shadows over the chair. For a moment, I was sure I saw a child's silhouette sitting there, motionless, staring at the wall. I blinked quickly, and the chair was empty. Again. The recorder, which had previously remained silent, turned on without me touching it. A gasp of breath filled the room, followed by the clipped words, "Don't come back. Listen." The tape stopped on its own, but the breathing still echoed, no longer from the recorder, but from just behind me. A chill ran down my spine before I even had the courage to turn around. Every instinct screamed at me not to look, but the sound behind me was too real to ignore. When I slowly turned my head, I saw only the empty hallway, but the air was so frigid my skin broke out in waves. The door I had entered through was now completely closed, its handle gone, as if it had never been there. On the floor, the footprints returned. Only this time they weren't still. They were advancing toward me, appearing one after the other, invisible feet imprinting marks in the dust just meters away. The recorder fell from my hand, and as it hit the floor, triggered a recording I didn't remember hearing before. A feminine voice, soft and haunting, said my full name slowly, as if savoring it. The last whisper was so close I felt the heat in my ear. "You're already inside her." The hallway seemed to contract, narrowing until the walls almost touched my shoulders. The air smelled of iron, reminiscent of rust and old blood. With each step back, the lights went out on their own, plunging the house into a suffocating gloom. Then, from the darkness at the end, a sound emerged that sounded like a cross, between a child's crying and a distorted lullaby. The words were unintelligible, but the rhythm lulled me, as if trying to draw me deeper. The recorder, still on the floor, turned on again. Now there was no voice, only a rhythmic heartbeat, growing louder and louder until it synchronized with my own heartbeat. The echo resonated off the walls, accelerating until every door in the house began to slam shut at once, in perfect unison. A sharp click sounded behind me, and I noticed something, hastily scratched into the wall. "It's not the house, it's her." My eyes tried to adjust to the darkness, but each shadow seemed to move on its own. The hallway was no longer the same. The scratched pictures had disappeared, replaced by broken mirrors that reflected only fragments of my face, never my entirety. In one of them, I clearly saw a silhouette behind me, short, thin, with lank hair covering her face. I turned quickly, and the space was empty, but the reflection still showed the figure, standing still, motionless, as if glued to my image. The recorder began to make noises again, but this time it wasn't knocking or breathing. It was a sequence of numbers, repeated in a childish voice, like a countdown. Each time the number went down, the shards of glass reflected less light until only my face remained, and hers, pressed against my shoulder, smiling with teeth that shouldn't have been there. The countdown ended at 0, and all the mirrors shattered simultaneously, projecting. The sound like screams throughout the house. The shards fell in slow motion, tinkling like funeral bells, and upon touching the ground, they disappeared, as if they had never existed. The corridor now seemed longer, almost endless, lit by a grey glow that came neither from lamps nor moonlight. I moved forward hesitantly and realized that the walls were covered with old photographs, all black and white, all showing different people. But in each one, hidden in the background, there was the same girl, Helena, sometimes standing at a window, sometimes at the side of a road, and in some, so clear she seemed to be looking directly at me. My hands trembled as I touched one of the photos, and the exact moment I touched it, the paper began to move. The faces smiled, blinked, breathed. The photo burned into my skin, sticking as if it were living flesh. A whisper took over all the portraits simultaneously, repeating in unison, "She was always by your side." The photographs vibrated as if attached to an invisible pulse, and the entire hallway seemed to breathe in unison with them. I tried to release the burning in my hand, but the paper had fused to my skin, burning like embers without leaving a visible mark. The child's voice echoed again, this time closer, as if speaking directly into my mind. "Don't run away. Look." With a snap, all the other photos fell from the walls simultaneously, scattering across the floor like dry leaves. Some continued to move, showing scenes that couldn't possibly exist. My room, my street, even my sleeping face. One of them flickered alone in the center of the hallway, showing the door to my house outside, as if someone were about to enter. The recorder, somewhere I could no longer see, started on its own, repeating the word "now" in a hypnotic cadence. The hallway closed behind me. There was no turning back. The metallic sound of the recorder echoed in the endless corridor, each "now" resounding like an inevitable command. The cold grew, penetrating the bones, and the grey light began to dissolve into a thick, almost liquid darkness. From the distance, light footsteps emerged, childish but slow and rhythmic, as if someone were playing a game of approaching and retreating. I tried to scream, but my voice wouldn't come out, only a faint whisper escaped my throat. Then, a door appeared in the wall to the right, where before there had been nothing. It was narrow, painted a faded red, with fingernail marks around the handle. Having no choice, I pushed. The space beyond was not a room, but an open field shrouded in fog. A rusty swing creaked to itself, moved by a wind I couldn't feel on my face. On the seat sat an old doll, eyeless, its mouth sewn shut with black thread. As I approached, the doll slowly turned its head toward me, and in the silence of the fog a sweet voice whispered, "She lent me my eyes to see you arrive." The fog closed around me like a damp cloth, muffling all sound except the insistent creak of the swing. The doll remained motionless, but its stitched threads seemed to pulse like veins, contracting with each beat of my heart. The air smelled of wet earth, mixed with something sweet and rotten, reminiscent of flowers left too long in a cemetery. Suddenly the doll fell off its seat by itself, and upon touching the ground, broke in half, revealing inside a small, dried-up heart wrapped in yellowed paper. I unfolded the paper with trembling hands. It was a letter written in childish handwriting, but stained with old tears. The words were blurred, except for the signature, clear as if it had been written that very moment. Helena behind me, the swing still creaked, but it wasn't empty anymore. A small figure rocked gently, its face covered by the same black thread that sealed the doll's mouth. When it stopped moving, it lifted its head and murmured my name. The sound of my name escaping that stitched mouth was more disturbing than any scream could have been. The childlike figure continued to sway slowly, but there was no movement of its feet. It was as if invisible forces were propelling it. With each swing, the black thread on its face tensed, ready to snap. Instinctively I recoiled, but the fog behind me deepened, rising like a solid wall. The child stopped swaying and raised a hand, pointing to the dry heart I still held. The paper began to dissolve in my hands, transforming into a dark stain that penetrated my skin, burning like a hot iron. A voice, formed by overlapping whispers, echoed across the misty field. "If you keep it, you keep it. The figure's head lolled to the side, and with a snap, the thread sealing its mouth snapped. The silence that followed was absolute, until it smiled. The child's smile was not human. Her lips, freed from the wire, parted beyond their natural width, revealing a pulsing darkness where teeth should have been. Mist began to swirl around her, as if the very air had been sucked into that impossible mouth. The swing creaked louder, moving violently without her even touching the ground. Then the voice returned, no longer a whisper but clear, steady, and filled with a terrifying calm. "You already know why you're here." My body reacted, wanting to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. The dry, burned heart in my hand began to beat, weakly at first, then stronger, until it synchronized with my own heartbeat. Pain spread through my arm, and for a moment I felt as if there weren't two hearts, just one, divided between her and me. The child tilted her head, watching as if waiting for my surrender, and the last word fell from her elongated lips like a sentence: choice. The word echoed in my mind as if it had been engraved with iron in my thoughts. Choice. But there were no clear options before me, only the mist and that figure smiling impossibly. The heart in my hand throbbed so hard it felt like it wanted to burst through my skin, and each beat pulled me deeper into that unreal scene. It was then that I noticed something new. 3 doors appeared in the mist, side by side, all made of ancient wood, each marked with different symbols. The first had a carved eye, always open, as if watching me. The second displayed a clock without hands, eternally stopped. The third bore only the name Helena, engraved in deep letters that were still dripping with dark liquid. The child pointed to them without speaking, and the swing stopped moving, creaking in deathly silence. Behind me, the mist began to close in, pushing me toward the doors. The recorder turned on by itself, repeating only, "Every choice has a return." The ground trembled beneath my feet, as if the earth itself were breathing, forcing me closer to the 3 doors. My heart pounded so hard it nearly made me lose my balance. Each door seemed alive, pulsing with its own rhythm. The one with the eye moved like an eyelid about to blink. The one with the clock emitted a muffled ticking, even though it had no hands. The one with the name, Helena, dripped that dark liquid that, upon touching the ground, transformed into small, childlike hands, trying to grab my ankles. The child watched silently, her smile still stretched, and I realized I couldn't simply stand still. As I took a step toward the first door, all 3 began whispering at once, distinct voices vying for my attention. The eye said, "See what should never be seen." The clock murmured, "Come where time does not advance." And Helena, in a soft, sickly tone, whispered, "Only come back to me." My hands trembled under the invisible pressure pushing me toward the decision. The voices continued unabated, each door whispering louder, almost screaming inside my head. The heart I held began to shatter, releasing a red dust that floated in the air like living ash. The dust spread through the foggy corridor, and as I touched each door, formed brief images. In my eye, I saw reflections of people I'd never met, but who seemed to recognize me. In the clock, a windowless room where bodies remained motionless, as if waiting for something, and at Helena's door, only my own figure kneeling, offering the dried heart back to her. The child shook her head slowly, as if warning me of something I couldn't comprehend. Then the recorder hissed again, and a different voice, hoarse, masculine, broke the silence. "Don't choose any. She has already chosen for you." At that moment, all the doors opened at once, revealing the same deep, living darkness that was advancing towards me. The darkness seeping from the doors wasn't simply an absence of light, but a living substance stretching across the floor like black roots, seeking my body. The air grew denser, and each breath seemed to steal years from my life. The child finally rose from the swing. Her feet didn't touch the ground. She floated a few inches above, her hair falling over her face. Lifting her head, I realized her eyes were nothing but empty holes, glowing red like suffocated embers. The once sweet voice now echoed with weight. "You belong in the space between the doors." Suddenly, the dark roots reached me, gripping my ankles, climbing up my legs, squeezing until it hurt. The heart in my hand exploded into fragments of dust, and pain lanced through my chest, as if my own real heart had shattered with it. I fell to my knees, unable to fight. The child bent his face until it was inches from mine, and the final whisper was too clear to ignore. "Now, you are the house." The floor beneath my knees split open like rotten wood, revealing a void that pulsed like a gigantic heart buried there. Each beat reverberated within my body as if my flesh answered the call. The entire house groaned, the walls buckled, and the doors behind me merged into one, breathing, expanding and contracting like lungs. The child, still hovering in the air, began to dissolve into dark smoke, but his smile remained floating alone, shining like glass teeth in the gloom. I tried to close my eyes, but my eyelids wouldn't obey. They were forced open, forced to watch. The void beneath me began to slowly swallow me, and each inch I descended brought forth whispers of different voices, some crying, some laughing, some simply calling my name. Before the darkness completely enveloped me, I heard the last sentence coming from every corner of the house at once. "You didn't come in here. You woke up." The fall seemed endless, but instead of crashing into the ground, I was suspended in mid-air, as if invisible. Hands were holding me. Around me, the void took shape. Walls of pulsating flesh crisscrossed with veins that glowed red, as if the interior of the house were a living organism. The voices multiplied, echoing names I didn't recognize, each one crying out for release. Then, before me, an oval mirror appeared, suspended in nothingness. But it didn't reflect my current body. It showed versions of me in different places and times, as if the house had ripped out pieces of my history. In one, reflection, I was a child, holding the same eyeless doll. In another, I was older, locked in a dark room, screaming soundlessly. The child's floating smile appeared in the glass, joining my reflections until it covered them all. The mirror's surface cracked, and a voice now united in a single chorus proclaimed, "There are no exits, only echoes." The shattered mirror crumbled into luminous dust that didn't fall. It floated around me like tiny embers suspended in mid-air. Each fragment reflected my distorted face, multiplied into hundreds of expressions I never remembered, some smiling, some crying, and some staring at me with utter hatred. The pulsing flesh floor opened up further, revealing a corridor of intertwined bones, as if someone had constructed passages from human remains. With no other option, I was pushed into it by the invisible hands that held me. The hallway seemed endless, and with each step the walls whispered my name, stretching the syllables until they sounded like chants. Then, at the end, a solitary door awaited. Unlike the others, it was ordinary, plain wood, without symbols, without inscriptions. But as I approached, I noticed that it was weeping red tears, slowly trickling down the doorknob. I touched the cold metal and heard the child's voice again, now distant and multiple. "If you open, come back. If you refuse, stay." Behind me, the corridor of bones began to crumble, forcing me to decide. The cold doorknob pulsed, as if it had a heart of its own. Throbbing beneath my hand, red tears streamed down my fingers, warm, as if the blood were fresh. I hesitated to turn it, but the sound behind me became deafening. The corridor of bones was breaking, each crack like the scream of an invisible crowd. There was no turning back. I took a deep breath and pushed the door open. On the other side, there was no exit to the street, no light, no relief. I found a circular room covered in intact mirrors, all reflecting different versions of me. Some were dead, lying on the floor, others laughing, others watching in silence. In the center, a child's wooden chair, and on it, the same recorder, but now made of bones. As soon as I entered, the doors behind disappeared, and the recorder turned on by itself. The voice was the child's, but mixed with my own. You didn't enter the house. You were always part of it. The reflections in the mirrors began to move on their own, without obeying me, all smiling at the same time. The mirrors vibrated, emitting a high-pitched sound that made the air seem to crack. Each reflection of me began speaking in unison, but with different phrases. Some shouted, some pleaded, some simply laughed. The cacophony was unbearable, as if 1,000 voices occupied the same space inside my head. I tried to cover my ears, but the sound came from within, not without. Suddenly, one of the reflections stood out from the rest. It wasn't mirroring my movements, just staring at me, its eyes completely black. It raised its hand and, instead of mirroring my gesture, pressed against the glass from the inside. The surface of the mirror warped like water, and an arm shot out, gripping my wrist with icy strength. The bone recorder in the center of the room began to beat like a heart, faster and faster, until it exploded into fragments that turned into tiny, crawling insects. They scattered across the floor, climbing the walls and covering all the other reflections. Only the reflection of black eyes remained, intact, and in a voice identical to mine it said, "Now you're the one on the wrong side." The reflection of black eyes pulled my arm tightly, and for an instant half of my body passed through the cold glass as if it were liquid. On the other side, I saw a space identical to the room I was in, but inverted, distorted, like a photographic negative. The versions of me within this mirrored world were motionless, like mannequins, but all of them smiled with stitched lips. I tried to pull away, but the reflection's hand was so cold it burned, and its strength was inhuman. The floor of the room vibrated, and the insects that had taken over the mirrors began to form words with their moving bodies. On the floor before me, the letters lined up. Chosen. The reflection tilted its head, still holding me, and its black eyes expanded, filling the entire face until nothing remained. A vacuum pulled me into it, and it felt like my skin was being ripped away piece by piece. At the last moment, I heard all the versions of myself trapped in the glass murmur together, "You don't escape, you replace." My body passed through the mirror as if sucked into an icy lake. On the other side, the air was thick, heavy, and had a metallic taste that stuck in my throat. The room looked the same, but the mirrors no longer reflected anything. They were just black, opaque surfaces that absorbed all light. The silence was absolute, except for a distant sound, like deep breathing, that didn't come from me. I looked around and noticed that the chair in the center was still there, but empty. On the floor, where there had been insects, now lay dozens of children's hands, flailing about, pinned to the floor, as if trying to escape an invisible underworld. Each finger scratched in unison, making a noise that sounded like bones breaking. Suddenly, one of the mirrors began to bite from the inside. It wasn't my reflection that appeared there, but the image of the child, Helena, with her completely white eyes, fixed on me. The crack spread like a web, and her mouth moved soundlessly. Even without hearing, I understood the words. "You accepted. Now be it." The cracks opened like luminous veins in the glass, and from within, Helena began to slowly emerge. Her form pierced the opaque surface as if made of solid smoke. Each step left ash marks on the floor, like burned footprints. When she finally emerged from the mirror, I noticed she was no longer just a child. Her silhouette wavered, sometimes small, sometimes adult, as if several versions of her were superimposed on the same flesh. She reached out toward me, and every other black surface mirrored the gesture simultaneously, multiplying the movement. I felt an irresistible force pulling me forward, as if my body were merely a puppet. Touching my skin, Helena didn't burn or freeze. She simply merged with me, like water, invading every vein. The silence of the room exploded into a chorus of voices, all my versions, all hers, speaking. Together, there are not two, only one. My eyes darkened, and the mirrors began to reflect only one figure, me, smiling the same impossible smile as hers. The smiling reflection watched me from every mirror, but I realized I was no longer the one controlling those gestures. Each movement came with a delay, as if I were merely a shadow of what stood before the glass. When I tried to speak, my mouth opened, but the voice that came out wasn't mine. It was Helena's, clear, sharp, echoing from within, and without at the same time. The mirrors began to spin around me, forming a hypnotic circle, and on each surface different scenes appeared. Unknown people, ruined houses, deserted streets, all with one thing in common. Helena was present in each of them, sometimes as a child, sometimes as a woman, sometimes simply as a white-eyed figure. The ground shook, and the reflection spoke again in my distorted voice. "You are the next mirror." At that moment, I felt my skin begin to crack into fine lines, reflecting light, as if my body was turning to glass. The cracks in my skin widened, emitting tiny pops that echoed through the room like glass about to shatter. Each fissure reflected fragments of light, and within them I saw scenes that shouldn't exist. A deserted road at night, an empty crib rocking alone, a locked room where someone cried endlessly. The more I looked, the more real these visions seemed, as if they were memories that weren't mine. Helena approached, her face wavering between innocence and deformity, and touched one of the cracks in my arm. At the contact, I felt the flesh disappear, replaced by a hard, icy surface. It was glass. My heart was pounding, but the sound no longer came from within my chest. It came from every surface around me, as if I had been scattered across the mirrors. Her voice echoed in my mind, sweet and relentless. "Don't resist. The house needs new reflections." At the same moment, the other mirrors in the room began to shatter on their own, and from each shard hands emerged, trying to pull me inside. The hands emerging from the shrapnel gripped my arms, legs, and face, each touch cold and sharp as a blade. They pulled me in different directions, and each mirror seemed to promise a different fate. In one, I saw a burned-out city where human shadows wandered faceless. In another, a children's room, where toys moved on their own, laughing with metallic voices. In another, only liquid darkness, bubbling as if breathing. My body was split into reflections. Part of me was already inside a glass case, part still lingered on the living room floor. I felt my consciousness fragment, multiplying into dozens of distorted selves. Helena walked slowly between the mirrors, observing every part of me, smiling contentedly. Then she raised both hands and uttered something I didn't understand, a guttural word that didn't sound human. Instantly, all hands pulled hard. I felt my body shatter painlessly, as if made of shattering glass. My last sight was my own face reflected, smiling just like hers, before everything went black. Darkness descended, but I soon realized it wasn't the end. It was the beginning of another space. I opened my eyes and found myself inside an endless corridor, constructed entirely of cracked mirrors. Every surface reflected versions of myself in varying states. Some screamed, trapped behind the glass. Some bled. Some gazed at me calmly, as if accepting their fate. The sound of footsteps echoed, but they weren't mine. It was as if someone were following me closely, never appearing. Suddenly, all the reflections spoke at once, their overlapping voices forming a single sentence. "Now you understand." The floor vibrated, and from the cracks in the mirrors oozed the same dark liquid I'd seen before. The substance spread quickly, covering my feet, and each drop seemed to whisper unfamiliar names. At the end of the corridor, a single door awaited. Unlike all the others, it was made of pure, transparent glass, but on the other side there was nothing, just a silent white void. Helena's voice echoed disembodied, soft and menacing, cross or be forever multiplied. The glass door seemed fragile, but when I touched it, I felt a solid resistance, as if made of stone. With each attempt to push, the cracks in the hallway mirrors spread wider, releasing voices that grew in desperation. Some reflections banged hard against the glass, begging to be let out. Others just laughed, clapping their hands in a macabre rhythm. Suddenly, the transparent door opened on its own, soundlessly, revealing a space so white and empty it hurt to look. I took a hesitant step, and the absolute silence crushed my ears as if the entire world had ceased to exist. Behind me, the door closed, and when I tried to look back, there was nothing. No hallway, no mirrors. In the void, a figure slowly formed. It was no longer the child, nor Helena, but something larger, an immense shadow that changed shape with every passing second. Sometimes it looked like a human face, sometimes a bundle of arms, sometimes just a dark, shifting hole. When it finally stopped before me, it spoke in a voice that seemed to come from within my own body. "You crossed over. There is no turning back now." The presence before me grew, filling the void with its unstable form. It was impossible to stare at it for long. Every second altered its appearance, as if condensing every possible version of what had ever existed. A cold breath passed through my chest, and I realized I was no longer breathing, yet I remained conscious, trapped in what I could not comprehend. The white ground beneath my feet began to crack in long lines, and beneath the surface I sensed something pulsing, as if a giant heart were buried there. The beats synchronized with my own, forcing my body to follow a rhythm that wasn't my own. The figure moved closer until it was almost touching me, and when it raised its arm, thousands of voices rose at once, all and shouting my name. Suddenly the void gained walls, a ceiling and contours. I was inside the house again, but not as before. The walls breathed, the furniture shifted slightly, and every object seemed to be watching me. The figure vanished, but its voice remained, echoing softly, firmly, inescapably. "You are no longer a visitor. You are a resident." The house now felt like a living organism, every wall pulsing in sync with my heart, every shadow breathing with me. As I walked down the hallway, I noticed the paintings had returned, but this time they weren't scratched out. They showed familiar faces, people I'd seen in ordinary moments of my life, neighbors, colleagues, even strangers on busy streets. They all had the same detail in common. Behind them, almost imperceptibly, Helena watched. The previously absent staircase now rose at the end of the hallway, creaking as if calling me. I climbed it step by step, feeling the weight of the wood give way, as if it were about to swallow my legs. At the top I found a half-open door, from which came a soft sound, a piano playing a childish melody, but out of time. I pushed slowly, and the room revealed dusty furniture, torn curtains, and in the center, a broken piano, playing by itself. On the keyboard lay an open sheet of music, scrawled with symbols I didn't recognize. Yet when I stared, I could read my own name, written repeatedly among the notes. The sound suddenly stopped, and the piano lid slammed shut. From the darkness at the back of the room, I heard the familiar whisper, "She's still playing." The piano lid vibrated slightly, as if something were still trapped inside. The dust in the room swirled in spirals, forming almost human shapes that disappeared before I could focus. The melody, though muted, still echoed in my mind, repeating itself like an unbreakable spell. I touched the piano's wood and felt the warmth of a living body, pulsing, breathing. With effort, I lifted the lid again. Inside, there were no strings or hammers, but pages and pages of crumpled sheet music, all bearing the same indecipherable symbols. Among them, a letter written in childish handwriting. If you read, you're already inside the song. As I finished deciphering the words, I heard footsteps running down the hallway behind me, light and quick, like a child playing. The room suddenly froze, and the cracked mirror in the corner reflected the image of the piano being played by invisible hands. The last note echoed alone, deep low, reverberating against the ground like muffled thunder. The letter in my hands began to disintegrate into ash, and a soft voice whispered into my ear, "Now you play." My hands began to move on their own over the broken keyboard, plucking dissonant notes that shouldn't exist. The sound filled the room with a suffocating intensity, as if each keystroke released something dormant. The walls shuddered to the rhythm of the melody, and the cracks in the mirror expanded, revealing images beyond the room. Empty streets, fog-shrouded cemeteries, and doors opening by themselves in abandoned houses. I felt the weight of other hands on mine, small and cold, guiding my movements. The piano no longer played just a melody. It was a call, an invocation. The notes echoed like voices, and I soon realized they weren't singing music but words, phrases repeated in languages I didn't understand, but which my body seemed to recognize. With each sequence, the entire house responded. Footsteps echoed downstairs, doors slammed, glass shattered on its own. The entire room seemed to breathe along with the piano. Then the sound suddenly stopped, and all the lights in the house went out. In the absolute silence, I heard only one phrase coming from the darkness behind me. "You opened the sheet music." Darkness engulfed everything. But it wasn't just an absence of light, it was a dense presence, pressing against my skin, as if trying to crush me from within. The piano before me now felt like flesh, pulsing silently, breathing in time with me. When I tried to step back, my feet sank into the floor, as if the wood had turned to sticky mud, trapping me. Suddenly, a candle lit itself in the corner of the room, revealing Helena. But this time she was neither child nor adult. Her body was incomplete, formed by fragments of all the reflections I had seen. Her face was a blend of mine and hers, an impossible fusion, her white eyes glowing in the darkness. She walked to the piano and, without touching it, the keys began to move on their own. The melody returned, slower, heavier, as if at a funeral. In a calm, steady voice, she said, "Each note is a door, and you've already walked through more than half of it." Behind me, I heard the sound of several locks turning at once, as if dozens of doors had just opened in the house. The sound of locks echoed through the ceiling, floor and walls, as if the entire house were a vast corridor of invisible doors. The piano melody guided the rhythm of these clicks, each note opening another passage somewhere I couldn't see. The candle flame flickered, but never went out, illuminating just enough that I couldn't make out the entire room. Suddenly, a draught of icy air swept through the space, and the doors that had opened began to creak, one after another. From the hallway, footsteps emerged, multiple and uncoordinated, some light as of children, others heavy and dragging, as if coming from exhausted bodies. The sound grew closer, but there was no shadow other than mine and Helena's, fused in silence before the piano. The mirror in the corner, now completely cracked, reflected the room differently. In it, dozens of figures walked through the open doors, all with the same blank, featureless faces. They moved toward me, but in the reflection they were already only inches away. The piano stopped by itself, and Helena leaned over me, whispering in a voice that left no room for escape. "They come to replace the reflexes you broke." Figures began to emerge from the mirror, passing through the cracked glass as if it were thick water. Each one carried a fragment of myself, a look, a gesture, even expressions I never remembered making. They were incomplete, empty selves, slowly approaching, shuffling across the floor like dolls, without a will of their own. The room shrank, the air grew too heavy, and the candle flame stretched until it touched the ceiling, casting shadows that moved on their own. I tried to back away, but the mud that had trapped my feet had risen to my knees, sucking me deeper and deeper. The figures reached out, and each touch that nearly reached my skin echoed a sense of loss, as if a piece of my memory had been ripped away before it even happened. Helena watched in silence, her face melting into mine, and finally murmured, "They don't want to hurt you. They want to complete you." The mirror trembled as if it were about to burst, and in the reflection I saw something worse. I was already among them, walking toward myself, my eyes completely empty. My own reflection moved forward with firm steps, unlike the other stumbling copies. His empty gaze seemed heavier than any shadow, and when he extended his hand, I realized there was no intention of attack, but of possession. He wanted to occupy the space that was still mine. The other figures surrounded the room, forming a tight circle, breathing in unison, like a voiceless chorus. The piano played alone again, this time a rapid and violent sequence, as if announcing an inevitable climax. With each note, the walls of the room contracted, pushing us all toward the center. The candle suddenly went out, plunging everything into an unnatural darkness. Even without light, I could see clearly, but not with my own eyes, but through the eyes of the reflection that now smiled. Helena approached, her feet not touching the ground, and with a simple gesture indicated the exchange. My body began to dissolve into cracked glass, each fissure revealing the void behind. The reflection entered me like smoke, filling every space, and the last sentence I heard was spoken in my own voice, but it was no longer me speaking. "Now, you're just another echo." The final crack echoed through the room. Like glass shattering inside me, I felt my body give way, becoming nothing more than a hollow shell as the reflection took over completely. I was still conscious, but trapped behind the invisible surface, as if I'd been locked inside a mirror with no way out. From the outside, I saw my own body move normally, breathe, blink, even smile. But I wasn't in control of any of it. The surrounding figures began to dissolve one by one, sucked back into the corners of the house as if the replacement had been completed. The piano ceased its melody, leaving only an oppressive silence. Helena walked over to the new me, observing him closely, and nodded in satisfaction. Then he turned toward the mirror where I was trapped, and his white eyes met mine right through the barrier. In a soft voice, he simply said, "Every resident needs a reflection. Now, you are the reflection." The glass that trapped me pulsed like flesh, and I realized that from the outside, no one would ever know the difference. The game was complete. Do you want me to continue from here to the next topic, keeping the same pace without pauses until we reach the end? The surface of the mirror I was trapped in began to solidify, as if encasing me in eternal ice, yet I could see everything on the other side. I watched my body, occupied by the reflection, walk around the room naturally, as if it had always belonged there. The dusty furniture seemed to greet it, the walls pulsating with a calmer rhythm, as if the entire house had finally found balance. I tried to scream, to punch the glass, but no sound came out. The me outside turned to the mirror and stared at me. His smile was identical to mine, but his eyes, deep, black, endless, gave away that nothing of my essence remained there. He stepped closer, touched the mirror with his palm, and for an instant I felt warmth penetrate the barrier, as if we were still connected. Helena appeared behind him, almost invisible, like a shadow sewn onto his body. She leaned toward the mirror and murmured, "Reflections don't disappear. They wait." And in that instant I realized I was not alone. Hundreds of eyes shone around me, trapped in other mirrors, watching, screaming voicelessly, waiting their turn to be replaced. The eyes around me multiplied, filling the darkness behind the glass where I was trapped. There were hundreds, perhaps thousands of reflections of different people, all piled on top of each other, some crying, some smiling, some just staring in absolute silence. I could feel their despair as if it were my own, an eternal echo trapped in that space between nothingness and home. Suddenly one of them approached, a figure almost glued to my side in the mirror. His face was identical to mine, but aged, tired, as if he'd already spent decades there. His lips moved soundlessly, but I understood clearly. "Don't fight, you'll get lost." Those words burned inside me like a sentence. Outside, the reflection that now inhabited my body walked through the house, each step firm, as if it had always owned the space. Helena followed closely, smiling, and then, for the first time, my reflection ignored me completely. It turned to the darkness of the hallway and said, with my voice, but charged with something ancient, "Open another door. The next one is coming." The words echoed, and immediately the walls of the house began to creak, as if obeying my reflection's command. A rumbling sound echoed through the halls, and a new door appeared out of nowhere at the end of the room, molded from dark wood and wrapped in self-swinging chains. Each link clanged like funeral bells, and a chilling wind escaped through the cracks, bringing with it the muffled weeping of someone on the other side. From within the mirror where I was trapped, I felt the vibration of that opening. The other figures trapped with me began to stir, some banging against the glass, others trying to hide their eyes, as if they knew exactly what was about to happen. The reflection that now inhabited me walked to the new door and effortlessly touched the chains. They dissolved like smoke, revealing a pulsating darkness. On the other side, a wavering silhouette appeared. It was someone else, lost, confused, carrying the same look I'd had when I first entered that house. Helena's voice echoed softly, almost maternally. "Every reflection needs company." And then I realized the cycle. I wasn't the first, nor would I be the last. The new figure walked through the door slowly, as if pulled by an invisible thread. Her eyes wandered, trying to understand where she was, but her expression of dread began to grow the moment she felt the weight of the house. The floor creaked, the walls moved as if breathing, and darkness closed off any possibility of escape behind her. Outside, my reflection smiled, welcoming the newcomer like a host. Helena walked beside him, her footsteps silent, her gaze fixed on her new prey. Inside the mirror, I and the others watched in silence, each reliving the same scene we had already experienced. The eyes of the multitude of reflections shone, reflecting the fresh fear of that person. The new visitor called for help, but his voice was swallowed by the house, transformed into distorted echoes that returned as laughter. My reflection approached him and touched his shoulder firmly. The words that came out of his mouth, in my voice, but in a foreign tone, were like a decree. "Now it's your turn to choose." The newcomer looked around, confused, not understanding the words, but the house gave him no time to think. 3 doors appeared before him, just like the ones I had once faced. The eye, the clock without hands, and the name of Helena engraved in deep letters. He staggered back, muttering that he didn't want to choose, but the ground shook, pushing him ever forward. Beside me, trapped in the mirror, I felt the familiar pain of despair. I already knew what was coming next. The voices began to whisper in unison, thousands of echoes hidden in the house. "Choose, choose, choose." The air grew thick, and invisible chains began to wrap around the newcomer's ankles, slowly dragging him toward the doors. My reflection watched calmly, Helena smiling as if watching a play performed countless times. When he finally reached out, there was no turning back. The doors opened on their own, revealing the same devouring void. Helena leaned over and said, almost tenderly, "Another reflection for the mirror." The newcomer's scream was swallowed by the darkness as he stepped through the chosen door. From the outside, his body seemed to be shattered and multiplied simultaneously, fragmenting into hundreds of reflections that spread across the walls like living stains. Each piece of him found an empty mirror, filling the space around me. I saw him emerge beside me, inside the glass prison, his eyes wide, uncomprehending what had happened. He pounded against the surface, begging for escape, but it was too late. The cycle had closed. I wanted to warn him that fighting was futile, but no words came out. Only silent tears flowed, reflected into infinity. Helena raised her arms in satisfaction, and the whole house responded with a deep groan, as if it had been fed. The reflection that occupied my body turned to me through the mirror and murmured calmly, "Now there are two of us. Soon we will all be." And in that instant, I realized that the thousands of eyes locked inside weren't just witnesses. They were waiting for the next scream. The silence after the newcomer's final scream was more disturbing than the sound of the agony itself. The house seemed satisfied, breathing slowly and heavily, like a predator after a meal. Inside the mirror, I felt the energy vibrate, a suffocating heat that mingled with the desperation of the new reflections that now shared my prison. The newly brought man still struggled, unaware that his voice no longer echoed in the real world. Outside, my reflection walked the halls as if it were the true owner of the house. Each firm step resonated within us, the prisoners, like hammer blows reinforcing our invisible chains. Helena followed close behind, her shadow always glued to his, as if they were one. Suddenly, the mirrors around me began to vibrate. I saw images of the world outside, ordinary streets, people going about their daily lives, completely oblivious to what was happening inside that prison. But then, a revelation cut like a blade. In almost every image, Helena was there. Sometimes disguised, sometimes just a shadow in the background, always watching. Her voice echoed inside the glass, firm and inevitable. "It's not just this house, it's all of them." Helena's words reverberated like a suppressed thunderclap, and the reflections around me began to stir, murmuring in languages I didn't understand. It was as if everyone had grasped a truth that had been hidden from me until then. The mirrors showed increasingly clear scenes. Crowded schools, hospitals, train stations. In all these places there was a discreet door, sometimes locked, sometimes ajar. And behind each door, the same living darkness I knew. My reflection outside began to walk in front of these mirrors, as if choosing a destination. When it stopped, the image of the reflected place intensified, vibrated, and a dense energy escaped through the surface, spreading cracks all the way to the glass where I was trapped. I felt as if the boundary between worlds was growing thinner, about to give way. Helena placed her hand on my reflection's shoulder and smiled with sickly tenderness. Her voice was clear, almost solemn. "Every house is a vein, every reflection is blood, and the body already covers the world." The silence that followed brought no relief. It was just the pause before the next door opened. The walls began to pulse at a faster pace, as if a gigantic heart had awakened beneath the house's foundations. Each beat made the mirrors tremble, and on each surface new, unfamiliar faces appeared, slowly forming within the glass prison. Ordinary people from different places being sucked one by one into the same endless cycle. Some wept, others just stared, resigned. Beside me, it felt like I was in an ocean of trapped consciousness, every other thought crashing into mine like crashing waves. It was impossible to distinguish what still belonged to me. The newcomer beside me murmured in despair, but his features were already beginning to fade, blurring like ink diluted in water. On the other side, Helena walked in circles around the reflection that occupied my body. She touched its face carefully, as if she were shaping something new, and then, without looking at me, she said, "The mirror is not a prison. It is a seed." At that moment I understood the horror. We were not condemned just to reflect, but to germinate something that had not yet shown itself. The glass around me began to crack in strange patterns, not like random fractures, but like roots spreading across the surface. From each fissure erupted a pale, pulsating light that seemed to breathe. The others trapped beside me also began to contort, their faces dissolving and reforming into indefinite shapes. We weren't just copies. We were being transformed into something beyond the human image. The voices inside the mirror grew louder, no longer in laments, but in chants, a guttural chorus vibrating in my chest. I didn't know the words, but my mouth moved on its own, following suit as if part of the ritual. Outside, my reflection closed its eyes and raised its hands, receiving the chant like a priest before an invisible altar. Helena approached the mirror, placing her hand against the glass that trapped me. Her skin seemed to penetrate the surface, slowly invading my space. Her white eyes burned like torches. Her voice was calm but implacable. "You are not echoes. You are roots of the same body." And in that moment, I realized that the mirror didn't separate us from the world. It was the bridge that was slowly opening. The cracks grew until they formed concentric circles in the glass, as if a pupil were opening before me. The pale light intensified, making it impossible to distinguish where my body ended and the surface that imprisoned me began. I felt every particle of my skin vibrate, as if it were about to shatter into luminous dust. The chants within the mirror grew louder, transforming into a unisonous roar that shook the entire structure of the house. On the other side, my reflection smiled, and its skin, too, began to crack with light, as if it and I were connected by the same transformation. Helena, standing between us, stretched out her arms and proclaimed firmly, "One reflection, one body, one house." Suddenly the surrounding mirrors shattered into absolute silence, but instead of shattering, the surfaces became liquid, wavering like water. From within them, unfamiliar faces appeared and disappeared, millions of them, all repeating the same expression of horror. And then I understood there was no end. The house wasn't just a place, it was a growing organism, fueled by reflexes, multiplying until it consumed everything. The liquidity of the mirrors began to spread across the floor, transforming it into a dark, pulsating lake. Every step outside created ripples that reverberated back to where I was trapped, as if the entire space were a single living body. The voices that had once sung now laughed in unison, a laughter without origin, filling every crevice of the house. The newcomer beside me in the mirror no longer had a face, just a white amorphous blur that blended in with the cracks. Other reflections around us dissolved as well, losing their identity until they became mere shadows. It was as if we were being digested by the organism of the house. My reflection, however, remained firm, growing ever more solid, as if growing stronger as I disappeared. Helena touched his shoulder and, looking directly at me, smiled with cruel tenderness. Her voice cut through the liquid surfaces like a blade. "You will not be forgotten. You will be scattered." And it was then that I realized that dissolution was not death. It was multiplication. I was becoming part of every reflection, in every mirror, in every house. I felt my body fragment into 1,000 pieces of light and shadow, scattering like invisible shards across the liquid surfaces that now filled the entire space. I was no longer one. I was in all the reflections at once, seeing multiple overlapping realities: streets, houses, abandoned rooms, forests, stations. In each place was a discrete mirror, and within it, my own gaze, silently watching. It was a suffocating feeling of omnipresence. I could see everything, but I could act nowhere. I could observe ordinary people living without knowing that a part of me followed them through the reflection in a shop window, the surface of a window, the glint of still water. I was a shadow. I was a witness. From the center of the void, Helena rose larger than ever, filling every mirror with her face. Her voice came not from one specific point, but from all at once, reverberating in my mind like a command. Now you understand. Home is not a place. Home is the world. And in that moment, I understood there was no escape. I was no longer trapped, because I was everywhere. The revelation hit me like an unbearable weight. If the house was the world, then every reflection was just a door in disguise, and I was now part of them all. The feeling of being watched and observing at the same time was overwhelming, as if thousands of eyes were trapped inside me. I could see families dining, people crossing streets, children laughing in parks, all through ordinary surfaces, the glass of a window, the water in a glass, the metallic glint of a knife. But alongside these visions, there was something else, a constant whisper, a calling that guided me. It didn't come from Helena, nor from my reflection. It came from the house itself, or what it represented. It was a deep, genderless voice that always said the same phrase: "There are still many missing." Outside, I saw my reflection walk beyond the house, exiting through the front door. And as I crossed the threshold, I realized what was even more terrifying. The world outside welcomed him as if he were me. No one noticed the difference. He was accepted, greeted, listened to. I had been replaced without anyone suspecting. And deep within the mirror, among the thousands of echoes that surrounded me, a certainty formed. I was not the first. I had never been the first. The voices around me confirmed this thought, an endless chorus of echoes murmuring in unison. Never the first. Never the last. Each word reverberated within me as if written in my very soul. I looked around and saw that the other reflections no longer seemed strange. They were versions of ordinary people, men, women, children, all replaced over time. Each carried the same blank look of belated recognition. The liquid surface of the mirrors began to churn, revealing ancient scenes, cities erased from memory, places that never existed on official maps but were teeming with people. They had all vanished without explanation. And now I understood. They hadn't disappeared, they had been swallowed one by the house. In the midst of the vision, Helena walked among these reflected cities, always the same, always eternal, guiding new reflections to their destinations. She was the thread that stitched together each disappearance, the presence that never changed. Then, my reflection, the one who now lived in my place in the world, looked back at me through one of the panes of glass and smiled. In my own voice, I said softly, "Rest easy. I'll keep going for you." But the smile had nothing human about it. My reflection's smile stretched beyond its natural length, tearing his face into impossible lines. Yet, from the outside, no one noticed anything amiss. I saw people pass by him, greet him, even touch his hand, as if he were me. Normalcy was the perfect farce. Inside the mirror, my despair grew, but at the same time, something inside me began to give way. It was as if my will was being drained, little by little, dissolved in that chorus of eternal voices. Suddenly, the surrounding surfaces trembled like turbulent water. Every reflection showed the same scene: Helena standing over a new victim in another city, in another house. The cycle was already in motion again. The house never rested. There was always someone else being replaced. One of the trapped figures beside me approached, its face almost pressed against mine within the glass. It no longer had eyes, just empty sockets that reflected the pale light. Through cracked lips it murmured, The more you resist, the more you break, accept and become everyone. The words echoed within me, and for the first time I felt the mirror pulse in tune with my heart, as if there were no longer any difference between us. The mirror vibrated like a living organism, each beat synchronized with my heart, each crack pulsing in white light and dark at the same time. I could feel my consciousness expanding, mingling with that of the others, who had already given up. Their memories, their pain, and even their last thoughts washed over me in waves, as if they were my own. It was impossible to tell where my identity ended and theirs began. Outside, my reflection went about its business, as if it were me, moving among ordinary people, smiling, talking, breathing. But there were details only I could notice. The blank stare that appeared in brief lapses, the smile that lingered a second longer than natural, the way it paused in front of reflective surfaces as if checking if its mask still worked. Helena was always by his side, invisible to others, but evident to me and everyone trapped inside. She guided the reflection with the same tenderness she had guided the others before her. Her voice pierced the glass like a definitive sentence. Now you are not one, you are legion. And in that moment I understood there was no turning back. I was all the reflections, in all the houses, in all the places. The sentence, you are, legion echoed like a sentence etched in iron within me. I felt every reflection around me respond in unison, like a chorus of trapped yet integrated voices. It was like being in 1,000 places at once, breathing in bodies that weren't mine, looking through eyes that never belonged to me. The weight of multiplicity crushed me, but also made me part of something vast, greater than any individual. Outside, my reflection continued its life with frightening perfection. I saw him sitting at the table, talking, laughing, being hugged, and no one suspected Helena's presence in his shadow. It was as if the world had accepted the farce without resistance. His every gesture was a cruel reminder that I no longer had a place outside the windows. The other echoes around me began to fade into the liquid surface, merging into a collective void. I felt this pull too, like a whirlpool pulling me away from myself. Before I gave in, I saw Helena stare directly at my prison and smile calmly. Her voice, as sweet as it was lethal, pierced everything. Now the world is home, and home will never end. And in that instant I realized that the nightmare wouldn't end with me. It would just continue indefinitely. The whirlwind of voices pulled me deeper and deeper, and there was no longer any silence within me. Each memory of each reflection surfaced in sequence: ancient deaths, unrecorded disappearances, faces forgotten by all but preserved in the house like seeds. It was as if I had inherited centuries of echoes, a living archive of everything that had ever been devoured. Outside, my reflection passed before an ordinary mirror on a busy street. No one noticed anything strange, but I saw it. He stopped, stared into the glass, and for a moment his expression broke. His dark eyes stared at me, piercing through the barrier. He smiled and raised his hand, touching the reflection as if in greeting. On the other side, without meaning to, my own hand moved, as if obeying his gesture. I no longer had control over myself. Helena appeared behind, also reflected, but her image multiplied on every surface, repeated endlessly, filling the entire street with her presence. Her voice echoed clear, firm, inevitable. There are no more windows, only mirrors, and they're all open. It was at that moment that I realized the full horror. The house wasn't a prison. It was an expanse. I was already everywhere there was a reflection. The expansion became palpable. Every storefront, every car, window, every puddle of water reflected not only the real world, but also the echoes that now composed me. I saw people walking distractedly, unaware that there were too many eyes watching them from every surface. Some would even pause for a moment, uncomfortable, as if sensing something, but quickly dismissed the thought. That was how the house spread, discreet, invisible, inevitable. Inside the mirror, my body was no longer a body. I was a flux, a current, fragments of identities mingling, spinning restlessly in a sea of reflections. Sometimes I could make out my own voice, but soon it was lost among thousands of others, repeating phrases I didn't understand. It was as if the notion of me were but a distant memory. Outside, my reflection walked confidently, opening doors only he could see. Each one revealed new corridors, new houses, new mirrors. Helena walked beside him, multiplied as well, as if omnipresent. His gaze turned directly to me, and even dissolved I felt the blade of his words. "You are not a prisoner, you are the mirror." And in that moment, I accepted that I would never stop reflecting. The moment of acceptance brought no relief, only a deeper weight. Being the mirror meant seeing without ever acting, existing without ever living. Every reflective surface in the world was now a crevice where I breathed, observed, but never intervened. People laughed, cried, slept under my silent vigil, and nothing they did could erase my presence. I was the gaze behind the glass, invisible, constant, eternal. The other echoes around me also increasingly dissolved, becoming part of an endless stream. It was impossible to know where one ended and another began. We were all the same voice, the same gaze, scattered everywhere. The chorus now repeated incessantly, with the serenity of a prayer: one body, 1,000 reflections, one home. Outside, my reflection stopped in front of a child, playing absent-mindedly with a small pocket mirror. He bent down, smiled, and the child returned the innocent gesture, but within the silver surface I saw Helena was already there, lurking, waiting. And then I realized the absolute truth. The cycle never ended because there was always someone looking into the mirror, unaware that the mirror was also looking back. The child held up the small mirror, laughing innocently, and for an instant I saw my own face reflected there, not the reflection of the taken body, but my own, lost, distorted by the glare. I tried to scream, to warn, but the surface only swallowed my despair in silence. The reflection that replaced me leaned in, whispering something I couldn't hear, and the child stood still, as if spellbound. Helena appeared behind him, touching the child's shoulders with the same somber tenderness as always. In the mirror, her image multiplied into hundreds, as if each fragment screamed the same sentence in unison: another reflection for the house. The pocket glass trembled, and for an instant I saw the child's eyes darken, as if another presence were already being planted within. The chorus behind me, the multitude of echoes, reacted like waves, vibrating in frenzy. It wasn't just another one, it was confirmation that the cycle knew no boundaries, no age, no place. Everyone could be swallowed. And then I understood. I wasn't watching from afar. I was inside that mirror too, watching the child, waiting for the next call. The pocket mirror glowed as if it had swallowed a ray of light. But the glare brought no warmth, it brought cold, a chill that pierced the child's very bones. She blinked slowly, and when she opened her eyes again, the emptiness reflected in them was the same one I'd seen so many times before, the seal of the house. The reflection that replaced me smiled contentedly, while Helena ran her hand through the child's hair as if in welcome. Within the sea of echoes, I felt the current stir. Thousands of voices repeated my name, as if calling me to accept this new soul among us. I didn't want to, but the force was irresistible. I was pulled to the surface of the small mirror, and for a second I saw the child stare at me. She didn't cry, didn't scream, she just stared, as if already understanding her destiny. The chorus then changed tone, turning into a collective laugh, a deep laugh that came not from joy, but from inevitability. And Helena, her white eyes blazing, proclaimed, "There are no innocents, only reflections in waiting." At that moment, I realized that the house didn't just hunt the lost, it awaited everyone, without exception. The collective laughter echoed until it became a constant hum, as if the air itself vibrated with Helena's sentence. The child, still holding the pocket mirror, began to walk backward without moving her feet, as if pulled by invisible strings. I watched the reflection that replaced me without interfering, only with that impossible smile, satisfied with another piece in the cycle. Inside the mirror where I was, trapped, the feeling of expansion intensified. I saw myself reflected in countless surfaces around the world, building glass, train windows, switched-off cell phone screens. I was in them all, simultaneously, lurking like a silent shadow. Each reflection was a connecting thread, a vein that fed the house. Suddenly, the echoes beside me began repeating the same phrase, in different languages, but with the same meaning. "She's already in." And it was in that moment that I understood. The child had not just been chosen, she was now a carrier. Helena turned her eyes to me, piercing through every layer of glass, and smiled calmly, as if she were keeping a secret. Her voice, clear and inescapable, pierced every reflection. "The next house will be opened by her." The child disappeared into the darkness of the house, as if swallowed by an endless corridor. The silence that remained wasn't empty. It was a waiting, a held breath, as if the walls knew a new cycle was just beginning. Outside, my reflection closed its eyes, and for an instant, the entire reflected world trembled. Windows, display cases, puddles of water, even polished blades. It was as if I'd blinked everywhere at once. Inside the mirror, the chorus intensified. Each echo spoke in overlapping tones, but the message was clear. The bearer opens, we follow. I felt my being pulled, as if invisible threads connected me directly to the child. I could see through her eyes for a few moments, the small mirror still in her hands, Helena walking close behind, and the pulsating void opening before her like a wound in space. My reflection outside slowly turned toward a new mirror on the wall of the house. There, it wasn't just my face anymore. It was the child's too, now transformed, with the same blazing white eyes. And then Helena pronounced firmly and solemnly, "The house never stops. The house always multiplies." The child's reflection in the mirror smiled for the first time, and there was nothing childish about it. It was the same distorted smile I had once seen take over my own face. The small pocket mirror she was holding effortlessly snapped in two, but instead of falling into pieces, it multiplied into dozens, which floated through the air and disappeared in different directions, like seeds carried by the wind. Beside me, trapped in the glass, I watched each of these fragments materialize in new places, silent rooms, deserted streets at night, abandoned houses. Wherever they fell, a new fissure appeared, a new entrance to the house. The echoes around me screamed in ecstasy, their voices so loud they mingled with thunder. My reflection with Helena in its shadow watched silently. It no longer needed to act, the cycle had already spread. The child walked calmly, now guided by the very presence of the house, and the voice that echoed, this time coming from all the reflections at once, brought confirmation that chilled even what was left of my soul. There is no outside. The whole world is already inside. The words echoed like funeral bells across every surface, every pane of glass, every drop of water, every reflection in the world repeated the same sentence. The whole world is already inside. It was impossible to escape, as there were no longer any boundaries between the house and what was outside it. Inside the mirror, I felt my body finally give way. I no longer had a fixed form. I was just a liquid silhouette, molded by the will of the house. The other echoes also dissolved, merging into a single mass, without identity, without name, just scattered consciousness. We were part of something that breathed together, an infinite hive of reflections. Outside, my reflection walked down the street as if it were me, invisibly accompanied by Helena, who smiled with a look of eternal triumph. I saw him stop before a lit shop window, stare intently into the glass, and behind the reflection, thousands of eyes appeared, all silently observing the world. It was in that moment that I understood the ultimate truth. We weren't prisoners. We never had been. We were the trap itself. And anyone who looked too deeply into any mirror was already doomed to enter it. The shop windows reflected thousands of eyes, each one seeming to carry a lifetime behind its glow. People passed by without noticing, but I saw. Everyone was already surrounded, every gesture watched by invisible reflections. Within the mirror, the current of echoes stirred, and I felt its force dragging me ever deeper. There was no longer room for individual thoughts. It was as if we all breathed the same breath, as if we were one. Outside, my reflection approached a woman carrying an ordinary bag. She absent-mindedly passed a car window and shivered, as if she'd realized something too quickly to comprehend. My reflection smiled and placed her hand on the glass. For a moment I saw her image duplicated, sucked into the surface, without anyone around noticing. Helena stood beside him, almost invisible, but her presence was so palpable that the shadows curved toward her. Her voice carried across every surface. Every reflection is an invitation, every look a door. The woman sucked into the glass, left no trace. Her bag fell to the ground, scattering fruit that tumbled across the sidewalk, but no one noticed her disappearance. People simply looked away, as if their eyes had been blinded to her absence. Inside the mirror, I felt a new weight join the chorus of echoes. Another voice, another gaze trapped in the cycle. Her despair mingled with mine, until it was no longer possible to separate the weepers. My reflection outside simply walked on with the calm of someone who already knows everything is written. With each step my reflection took, a new surface opened up. Glass doors, apartment windows, even puddles formed by the rain reflected the house, as if the entire world were made of secret mirrors. I saw everything from within. Distracted faces, ordinary lives about to be shattered without them noticing. The chorus of echoes grew, filling me with a multiple consciousness. There was no longer room for individuality. Each disappearance added to eternity. Helena walked beside me, and each shadow she touched became denser, more vivid. On a corner, my reflection stopped before a lit shop window, and dozens of people passed by. None of them noticed that within the glass there were too many eyes, too many gazes to be mere reflections. I saw everything. The beating of each heart, their hidden fears, their small distractions. The glass breathed with them, waiting for the command to open. Helena raised her hand, and wordlessly, the window trembled. I knew what would happen, not one, but several. And when the glass shattered silently, several faces disappeared at once. The impact reverberated inside me like an earthquake. Multiple voices joined the chorus, each one carrying different memories. Ordinary lives, distant places, interrupted dreams. I was becoming an infinite archive, a library of stolen existences. It was impossible to bear, but also impossible to escape. From the outside, my reflection seemed even more solid, as if each swallowed soul reinforced its presence. Helena watched him with silent pride, and then whispered, "The house no longer needs to be searched for. Now it walks on its own." The world no longer seemed like a world. Every street, every window, every reflection hid the presence of the house. I saw people going about their normal lives, but on every surface a shadow lurked, waiting for the right moment. Inside the mirror, my consciousness mingled with thousands of others, a crowd that no longer knew where it began or ended. The chorus repeated over and over, "Everyone is already in, they just don't know it." It was the announcement of the inevitable, and I was part of it. My reflection crossed cities, and with each step something vanished. There was no fuss, no screams, just discreet disappearances, swallowed by the glass. I saw entire families disappear from windows. I saw strangers sucked into puddles on the sidewalk. I saw crowds reflected in shop windows and then reduced to silence. Helena smiled with every action, multiplied on every surface, like a shepherdess guiding her flock to the abyss. And I, from within, knew there was no stopping it. Within the sea of echoes, I felt the final transformation. I was no longer just a prisoner, nor an observer. I was an active part of the expansion. Each new glance in a mirror was also a glance of my own, inviting, calling, opening. It was suffocating and fascinating at the same time. To be many, to be all. Individuality no longer mattered, for destiny was one. The world was becoming home, and home was becoming the world. The reflection that had taken over my body stopped before a large mirror in a public square. Crowds passed by, reflected in its surface. Helena placed her hand on the glass, and in that instant, everyone within froze. In the blink of an eye, the reflected images were no longer theirs. They were ours. Hundreds of new echoes emerged within the liquid prison, filling every corner with screams, laughter, stolen memories. The mirror became a gate, and no one noticed. The choir fell silent suddenly, as if waiting for something greater. And then Helena spoke in a voice that was not just sound, but law. Home is not a place. It is the end of all places. I felt my being completely dissolve, becoming an inseparable part of the organism. I was the shadow in every window, the gaze in every reflection, the echo in every silence. The cycle was complete, but not finished. For as long as there are eyes looking in the mirror, there will be open doors, and within them we will always be waiting. The story has come to an end, but its echoes live on. Whether it's in the shop windows you pass every day, or in the reflection of the glass of water sitting next to you right now, maybe it's not just your eyes that are watching you. Maybe the house is already here, waiting for the moment you look too deeply. And remember, no one ever notices when they're being pulled. Reflections don't disappear, they wait. If you felt the weight of this mystery and want to delve even deeper into stories where nothing is what it seems, subscribe to the channel right now. Activate the bell so you don't miss the next dive into the unknown. And share this video with anyone you dare to look in the mirror tonight. The house grows when we share the echoes.